this dialogue is called Feeding the Future, Innovators at the Table. This panel brings together leading food innovators, sector experts, and funders to explore the vital question, how can we transform promising research and innovation into real-world products and services? I'm pleased to introduce our two moderators who are going to guide this discussion today. We have Lavina Gully, who is the Regional Innovations Director for BC and Yukon at the Canadian Food Innovation Network. Shout out to CFIN for being one of our sponsors. She works at the intersection of food innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship, connecting researchers, entrepreneurs, and industry partners to accelerate the development and adoption of novel technologies. Lavina holds a BSc in Agriculture and a Master of Food Science from UBC, and also serves on the board of the Canadian Institute for Food Science and Technology. We also have Rahul Singh, who is the Director of the BC Centre for Agritech Innovation at Fraser University. With nearly 2 decades of experience across academia, industry, and public-private innovation, he leads a $27.5 million portfolio focused on agri-tech solutions that strengthen food security and climate resilience. Rahul is also a microbiologist and a biological engineer and a recognized leader in translating research into market-ready applications. So please join me in welcoming Lavina and Rahul.
Thank you, Lewis. I think that was quite a bit. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to this interactive dialogue, Feeding the Future, Innovators at the Table. And if you're wondering why this is an interactive dialogue, is because we don't have any presentations, and almost no presentation. I think we have 1 or 2 slides, but in general, this is going to be just a conversation, not among the panelists we have here and the moderators, but also with you all, in this room as well. And what we will do is that as we engage in our discussions, we will also encourage each of you, if you see opportunity to either join that particular discussion, or if you have any questions around that, feel free to raise your hand while we are having that discussion, and we will engage you in our discussions as well. And one thing I also realized, from Jared's presentation, that he already brought a very critical perspective to this panel, about how we look at food innovation from a cultural, and traditional perspective as well. And I hope we'll be able to have some informed, dialogue as we engage in our discussion here as well. Levis already introduced us, so I will not get into my introduction again. But we also have, a very inspiring group of people here in this panel. And I will encourage you to go and check their bios on the website. And you'll see how diverse they have, in the kind of experience they have as well. And but we will also give, the way we'll start here is that we'll start with Lavina, who will introduce herself, plus also about the organization, she is representing here as well. And then each of the panel members will also share who they are, why they are here, what their, values and missions are, that are tied to the food sector as well. And one thing I also wanted to highlight, you might be wondering also why we have 2 moderators, for this particular panel. And the way I see it as is that, Lavina comes from a different organization. I'm from a very unique organization as well. And we both bring very different perspective to how we look at, innovation support and management, in the agriculture, agri-food sectors. So although we both, provide some sort of funding or support to organizations or SMEs in our case, but our approach to support is quite distinct. And I think that will also inform as we engage into this discussion. So I would let Lavina introduce herself and her organizations, and then we'll follow on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rahul. It's a real pleasure to be here today in this amazing venue. So if you're not familiar with CFIN, or the Canadian Food Innovation Network, we're a national not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to advancing innovation and collaboration within Canada's food sector. We are funded by 2 different federal departments. The first is ISED, or Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and then also Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So the work that we do focuses on two main areas. The first is innovation funding. So we provide grants to help develop Canadian technologies for the food industry, specifically technologies that we like to call food tech. You can think of food tech as the downstream relative of ag tech. So it's innovation that can be beneficial or applied to manufacturing of food, processing, packaging of food, a retail environment, or even food service or restaurants. So the projects that we fund span everything from the development of new ingredients. So for example, Sean is here today from Maia Farms. They're one of our grant recipients. So we've provided them funding to develop a novel protein ingredient. So projects like that to things like smart manufacturing tools, new sensors, new robotics, pieces of automation for food processing plants, as well as solutions for restaurant industry, back of kitchen, new forms of packaging like I mentioned, or even projects like software, so new ERP systems, pricing analytics, or even e-commerce platforms. And what's really unique about our programs is that we strictly fund Canadian solutions or Canadian innovators. And we're one of the few programs that actually de-risks quite early stage development or research and development, which can be a little bit hard to find. So we were established in 2021, and since then we've delivered just over $20 million in grant funding out to Canadian innovators. We've funded about 115 projects across Canada, including about 20 here based in BC. The second area that we really focus on is the collaboration side or the network side. With financial support from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, we've built an online community and networking platform called Yodel. We're getting very close to 8,000 users. Those users represent a very diverse group of food professionals, so everyone from government to academia to industry, entrepreneurs, service providers, students as well. We created this really as a meeting place for all these groups to connect, to share ideas and resources with each other in the hopes that they spark kind of new thoughts, new ideas, and form new valuable partnerships. So if you are interested in joining our network, feel free to scan the QR code that's on the screen. And then we also offer one-on-one support. So for example, myself in my role, you can reach out to me directly. I'm based here in Vancouver, and it's really my role to work with you to help you make sense of the food innovation landscape and ecosystem, help connect you to the right partners, and really point you towards opportunities and resources that can help move your project or your business forward. I'll pass it on to Sean.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Lacoursiere. I am the Chief Innovation Officer and co-founder of Maia Farms. At Maia Farms, we have an interesting, I would say, history. We spun out of what was called the Deep Space Food Challenge, in which we developed a polyclonal growth chamber to feed astronauts on a 4-year mission to Mars. And so after winning this competition, a few of the other co-founding members of Maia, we started working on Maia Farms full-time. Since then, we've grown from about 3 people to now, I believe, 13 full-time employees. We have, been doing research, working with CFIN, the British Columbia Centre for Agritech Innovation, National Research Council of Canada, to really bring forward some new technology to both produce mushroom mycelium, but to also create new mushroom-based ingredients. So my job here at Maia Farms is to really just oversee the research and the development, as long as with regulatory compliance, intellectual property. And yeah, a bit of my background personally. So I graduated from the University of Lethbridge with a doctorate in cellular molecular neuroscience. And so you might be thinking, what does a neuroscientist know about food? Very little, I'll be honest. It took me about 4.5 years to, kind of get here. But again, as kind of the theme of this, my ideas are not really my own ideas. I just listen and I try to learn as much as I can, and then try to communicate those ideas to people the best I possibly can. Yeah, so I'll kind of keep it short, but please feel free to come up to me afterwards and ask me other questions. But yeah, excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk a bit more about, cultivating resilience with this panel here. So I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you. As you might know by now, my name is Mike Manion. I started many years ago in the agricultural world. I was raised on a dairy farm in Eastern Ontario and attended university, graduated with a degree in political science and history. You know, the obvious prerequisite for farming and agriculture, but anyways, I always loved agriculture, and so I returned to my roots and got very involved, interestingly enough, in the mushroom business. Over the years, the mushroom business changed. I owned my own farm for a number of years to the point where it was growing so fast I recognized that large was in, small was out. And at the time, you might not consider us small. We had 30 employees and had a gross revenue of over $1.5 million. But at that time, like through the 80s and 90s, dealing with the large retailers, it was just tough to make a living. So I was fortunate enough to sell, and I moved into the corporate world. And through the corporate world, a variety of iterations, I had the pleasure of running farms in 6 out of 10 Canadian provinces. And it really taught me an awful lot about the various types of agriculture across the country and what the differences are in Canadian agriculture as you cross the country. So after quite a number of years in that industry, I kind of moved out of it to the point where I was looking for something else to do about 10 years ago, and I came across an Agritech accelerator in Mission, BC. And I believe we were the first ones to start a tech accelerator based on agriculture. And I have to tell you, I was sitting in a room after and kind of wondering, why did they hire me? Because these guys were all from Silicon Valley. They were investor types. They were what we used to refer to as certified smart guys. And I said, what's a farmer from Eastern Ontario doing in this room? Well, as we will get into a little bit later, what I quickly found out is that you actually have to have a connection to agriculture to develop ag tech successfully. So anyways, with that, I'll leave it and just really pleased to be here.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Mohamed Imam. I'm actually in love with how diverse the panel is, because everybody's coming from a different side. I'm also coming from a different sector, architecture and construction, which has given me a very delightful different angle of how agriculture should be integrated in our cities. I've been working in architecture and the adjacent agriculture sector for almost 20 years now. I've worked quite a bit around the world. I'm originally from Egypt, and then I worked in China for a bit, in Turkey, in UK where I studied, and then finally Vancouver, which I call my lovely home, which I also had the opportunity to work on my PhD in resource circularity, which is in essence how to integrate resources in our buildings. And resources here is in a larger sense, food, energy, water, how to make this closed loop ecosystem, and how to leverage technology and to leverage architecture to the benefit of life in our cities and the connection to continue to grow and to educate the people of how and where their resources come from. And I resonate a lot with what Mike said of you need somebody with expertise in agriculture to make this a viable proposition. And that's something that you hear on and on of why many of the urban agriculture opportunities sometimes fail, or why the tech in agriculture sometimes fail, because they do not rely on the agricultural expertise and they think of it as more of an innovation or a purely tech industry. So with that, I feel I'm in good company, and I'll keep it brief and happy to continue to engage in the conversation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Rodrigo Santana here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Beritech. I'll talk about Beritech shortly. In addition to that, I'm also an innovation advisor for Bioenterprise. Like Mike here, we are part of a group of 25 to 30 advisors across Canada, where we help entrepreneurs go through the valley of death, which we're going to be talking today, all the way from ideation to commercialization. In addition to that, because I'm not busy enough, I'm also the director of Agri-Food business for GHD, which is an engineering consulting company, a multinational. I take care of the Western region. For Beritech, Beritech is a early stage startup founded in 2022, co-founded by myself and my business partner, Eric Gerbrandt. Eric is the research director of the Association of Blueberries and Raspberries in BC, where he conducts different trials for the associations. Our vision is to reduce Canada's dependence on import berries. The problem that we're trying to solve is that the production is seasonal and the consumption is year-round. So what happens, the experience that the Canadian consumer has is during the summer, if you are a berry consumer like I am, you're going to see fresh, high-quality, low-cost berries. The market's flooded with berries for 3 months. The problem is the remainder of the year, the 9 months, we have to import those berries from Peru, Chile, and other warmer countries. Canada imports about $1.5 billion per year of berries. And the experience of the Canadian consumer is that those berries, they don't taste as good, they don't last as long, they're not always available because of supply chain issues. And they are grown, produced, and shipped on an unsustainable way, all the way from excessive use of pesticides. If you go to a berry farm in Peru, you're going to be a bit shocked what you're going to see there. And the berries that we are consuming. They also take a long way to get here, about 5,000 miles sometimes. So what happens is that they have to harvest the berries 5 to 6 weeks prior to consumption, so therefore the quality is not the same, not to mention the carbon footprint. So the solution is to grow berries within year-round in Canada, and how can you do that? So our approach is a multidisciplinary approach where we are integrating and or developing methodologies and technology within breeding and genomics, control environment, agriculture, advanced horticultural methods, trying to also learn from the last 20, 30 years what has been developed within CEA and applying that to a crop that has never been grown within CEA. So the main challenge is, of course, the economics. So we are trying to identify the best model, and we have a research farm in Chilliwack where we've been developing, now we are in the pilot phase. We are conducting growth trials. We have done the proof of concept where we have selected some varieties, and in parallel, we are working with Fraser University, with the Department of Biology, on the gene editing side, where phase 1, we are using existing field berry varieties that we can bring indoors, and that would be the short-term solution. So we believe 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to have that commercial system. And phase 2, which is more the longer term, will be gene editing berries, where we're looking for 2 traits. One is to decrease the architecture of the plants, so you can have more plants inside the greenhouse, as an example. And secondly, we are inducing early flowering so you can increase productivity. It's all about productivity and also quality, to make sure that we have that quality. I will talk a little bit about that as we go, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, everyone. And indeed, we have a neuroscientist, political science history expert, architect in this panel, and I hope that after we end, you would see why multidisciplinarity is indeed needed, for innovation in any sector, but especially the food sector. With that, I will just share highlights of what BCCAI is so that you are aware of it. BCCAI, as we call it, it's BC Center for Agritech Innovation, founded in 2022 with the generous funding from Pacific Economic Development Canada, who gave us $10 million for a 5-year period, and also from the province of British Columbia through Ministry of Jobs and Economic Growth now, who gave us $6.5 million to run this center, with the objective to empower the agriculture sector by de-risking technology adoption for greater efficiency, productivity, and sustainability. And since our launch, we have co-invested about $18 million in 33 projects, which have yielded 23 products, services, and processes. We have created 91 jobs, delivered 22 training programs, trained over 2,000 highly qualified personnel. So did a lot of work in the last 3 years to really support the innovation ecosystem within the agriculture and food sectors in BC. With that, I will pass it to Lavina, to initiate our first round of discussion.
Great, thank you. Well, let's kick it off with some questions for our panel. Let's start off with kind of thinking about the future of food and getting a sense of vision, and let's see the different perspectives that we have here. So when we really talk about innovation, I think it is easy to focus on what's happening right here, right now, but it's that long-term vision, I think, that really defines, leadership in this space. Some people might even say, the biggest breakthroughs in food haven't even yet been imagined yet. So question for each of you, what does the future of food innovation look like to you in the next 10 to 15 years, but also in a more distant horizon, say 500 years from now? Let's just start with Sean and maybe make our way down.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I think we're always trying to predict things, and I think humans just generally are really bad at predicting things more than maybe even a few minutes out. But especially when we start looking into 500 years or 100 years. But I would like to just say that I don't have anything specific necessarily, but I would just hope it's cleaner. And I mean that in the ways of reducing the necessary demand of fossil fuels, reducing the need for animal agriculture, and shifting towards, we like to throw around the term sustainable food systems, but certain systems that we've seen where you're going from oxygen and carbon dioxide and nitrogen that's just in the air into whole proteins and whole macronutrients. And so but I think we'd like to think of it as more of, as we progress, we become more innovative to become cleaner, more efficient, and less wasteful. I read this news article that was saying something, upwards of 51% of food produced in Canada is wasted. And to me, I thought that was just absurd, because we're always talking about how can we improve food production systems, how do we increase the efficiency, but in many ways it's just how can we do less of the bad things? And so if that is, reducing our waste and focusing on just, not so much just the technology, but the ways in which we use the technologies, ways we interact with our food system, I think this is going to take a societal and global shift in just consciousness, I think, generally, to go away from these systems that, we have relied on. They've, fed millions, if not billions of people. But I think it's just time for the next level of things to, again, cleaner, more efficient, more sustainable.
I agree that when we look far in the future that, precision fermentation and things like what Sean is doing is probably going to be the future. However, we have to get there. And the things that we are looking at right now that are critical to agriculture and the agri-food business surviving is we have to have a means of innovating labor. Labor is one of the most critical components of agriculture today, and because in some cases we're talking 50% of the cost of agriculture is labor. And most of our labor is offshore, and as a result, that is going to continue to be under a microscope. So I think what we're going to see is the advance of robotics, and I'm going to do a little shout out for some BC companies right now that are sort of leading the charge in that regard. We have a company called 4Ag in British Columbia that has just received large funding, and they're one of the premier robotics for mushroom harvesting globally. In fact, they were just selected as the startup of the year in a global show in Europe. So we have a lot of exciting things going on. We also have a company locally that's called New Peak Robotics. They're working as a strawberry harvester. So those are the things that are really going to shape, let's say, the immediate term. But then, of course, we have AI is creeping into agriculture. In order to be more precise, farmers have to limit their inputs. So in terms of, we have companies now that do spraying, the GPS mapping and weed mapping so that farmers can target specific areas. So those are the kinds of things that are going to get us as an ag superpower in the interim and lead us into some big changes like what Sean has mentioned.
I agree, Canada should be a food superpower. We have all the means to do that. I think, again, coming from the architecture background, I think the future of food is spatial. It's ecosystem driven. How can you integrate a decentralized network across a city where every surface is being utilized for the benefit of the people living in it? We have a lot of underutilized area in our cities, even the dense one. Actually, most particularly the dense ones, because we have a lot of buildings and a lot of surface area. We have rooftops that are not utilized, facades, mechanical zones in the building, all of which are areas in premier location in the city, because, and coming back to data, by 2050, 80% of the food consumption will be in the city. So just from an economical standpoint, having the thing that people need next to them is just makes sense. So I think it's not so far off the horizon in really unlocking this area, and I will give a shout out to our city of Vancouver, which is quite progressive globally, because we have studied and we work, and I neglected to mention this in the beginning, I'm the senior research lead of Perkins&Will, which is the second largest architecture firm globally. And we do have a global portfolio across the world. And we do work in multiple projects currently. And Vancouver policy is very progressive in terms of supporting food integration in the city. We do have a lot of policies that are active, and we should also support to increase that amount of policy integration, especially when it comes to food as part of that ecosystem. So the policy is already there. It's how to utilize it properly across our city. So I see this something as almost the short term. In the longer horizon, I see this trend continuing, and where the buildings in our city become full ecosystems where the waste that's being generated from the occupants of the building is valorized on site and being used as soil. The water, rainwater or gray water, is being upcycled and used as irrigation. It does, from a construction standpoint, it does make the most sense to integrate farms with buildings, because the byproducts of a building is the food for the farm, and the farm, not just from the food perspective, from the heat, from the oxygen, is something that the occupants need. So I think that trajectory is going to continue. Thank you.
I do believe we have to go one step back when we talk about the future of innovation to make sure we understand what innovation means, right? Innovation is not just high tech. We have sometimes that mindset of innovation is going to be AI, robotics, and whatnot. That's part of innovation too. But innovation could be a new idea, a new process, a new system, or improving an existing system, an existing process. Sometimes the most powerful things are more simpler. So, for example, at Beritech, one thing that we're doing, like I mentioned, we are leveraging some of existing technologies applied to other crops indoors that can be applied to our berries. But we're also bringing some field crops innovation to indoors. So just making sure that when we talk about innovation, it's not just the high-tech stuff. And then in regards to the future of innovation, I believe is going to be linked with the challenges that we are facing, right? I think the population growth, climate change, sustainability, food safety, food sovereignty, those are the main challenges. So the innovation should be linked to that, and we already seen that. If you look at the last 10, 15 years, you have seen innovation on precision farming, increasing productivity, CEA technology as well, where until a couple of decades ago, we used to grow just tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers in greenhouses. Now you're starting to see other products, starting to see cannabis over the last 10 years. You have also strawberries, and we're going to see more and more diversification of crops indoors, like you mentioned, growing closer to the consumer. So we're going to be starting to see some of that too. And going back again the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a lot of improvements or innovation in robotics, biotechnology, automation. I think what you're going to see in the next 10, 15 years is ultra-precise approach to that. Like Mike mentioned, AI is going to play a big part. The AI data-driven technology is going to help us to go back again, increase productivity. How can you produce with less or with the same? And how can you do it in a sustainable way as well, which sometimes they're very challenging. For the farmer, sometimes sustainability means it's going to cost more, and that's not necessarily the case. So it's important that you have that both leverage that. That's how I see the future of innovation within the next 10, 15 years. Within 500 years, I can't dare to even comment. I have no idea what's going to happen in 500 years. No, I'll leave that to Sean.
If I may just add one more point. It was interesting how events shape what is happening in our food innovation. COVID, of course, was a wake-up call to agriculture. You know, a lot of people went to the grocery stores during COVID and found shelves empty. That had never happened before. And one of the reasons is how our agricultural systems had developed over time. And one of the, there's a couple of things that took place that we should note. The reason why dairy and poultry and eggs were on our shelf during COVID is because we have a supply management system that's been heavily criticized over the years because it's adding more cost to the system. But nobody was criticizing it during COVID when it was actually available. At the same time, the beef industry, when we looked looking for beef, there was no beef to be found. Why was that? The reason is that 55% of beef processed in Canada was done at one plant in Alberta. So that's sort of the global movement in agriculture, and that's where you end up with those sort of scenarios. Since then, Investment Agriculture, which I'm a proud member of, has invested, and through the generosity of the federal and provincial governments, in local abattoirs. So that issue that we had, that you wouldn't find beef during a crisis, has been to some extent mitigated. So I think when we're talking about the future, I think we're getting a little smarter on how we approach things.
And Mike, I'm not sure if you know, but that plant that you mentioned in Alberta, 50% of what's produced is exported.
Yes.
Which is an additional problem that we might have. So one stat here is the study after COVID is if the ports of Canada shuts down for 2 weeks, you're going to run out of products on the grocery stores, on the shelves. That's how vulnerable Canada is with some products. Food for thought.
There's some great insights, and it only underscores like the need for food security that we have seen during COVID as well. Plus also, I think innovation in the food sector has to be inclusive. There's there's no denying that. It has to be encompassing as well and continuous as well, because we need food on a daily basis. And as you're highlighting, if one port shuts down, that creates significant food security issue. I wonder if anyone from the audience would like to add any perspective or comment or even challenge any of the argument made by the panelists here. Go for it.
There you go. Hi, I was wondering if anyone has done research on the life cycle assessment between growing food indoors in Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland or in British Columbia, compared to the transportation of importing it from other countries?
Yes, we have done preliminary, yes. I mean, one of the key elements, and we can talk a little bit about that, about innovation, is innovation is only innovation if it solves a problem. Otherwise, it's not innovation, right? So in order to solve a problem as well, there needs to be economic viability. So we've been laser focused at Beritech regarding, can we produce indoors, but can it be economically viable as well? We have done high-level research in regards to, I think you're asking about energy consumption, is that correct? The energy consumption is going to be related as well to the productivity. So it's just one portion, and you have to look at the holistic approach of how much input do you need for certain outputs, right? So right now, we are looking at the outputs also. We know, for example, that our berries, we can produce 5 to 8 times more than a field berry today, okay? The question is that enough to justify the economics and the energy consumption as well? So this is a study that we are doing, which takes time. We're going to be talking a little bit about that too, but agriculture innovation takes time, especially the plants that we work with. They are perennial plants, they have long growth cycles. You need to go through several growth cycles until you can master really the target objectives. So I don't have an answer today of what's the pros and cons regarding energy consumption, but our pilots so far indicate that it is economically viable.
Because we've been, over the past 2 years, compiling a lot of LCAs, life cycle assessments, and people in this room have been helping us developing it. I'm looking at Alex over there, not to put you on the spot. We've been compiling a lot of data around not just energy, but nutritional density, water consumption. And the short answer is it depends on the crop. Some crops are more viable in an indoor setting, in an urban environment setting. Others, not yet. Leafy greens is a very successful type of integration because it has a very short growth cycle. The lighting levels are not as heavy as fruiting vegetables, let's say. But from a nutritional density perspective, that's the target market per se, because the amount of nutritional loss that occurs with the large amount we import from California is significant, like 80% loss during that consumption. One of the studies that I've read states, whereas other crops do not have that dramatic loss in nutritional value. So as we grow the recipes and as we grow the amounts of types of crops that we produce, it's best to focus on the crops that have the most economical viability, and then work our way up from there. And we do have a lot of this material published through Perkins&Will, and I'm happy to share this material afterwards.
And I'd just like to add to that as well. Again, shout out to the University of the Fraser Valley and the Just Transition program for helping us with some of these LCAs. But what we found to be quite interesting is, so this was with biomass fermentation. Our initial trials and the data for our LCA was all done on Prince Edward Island. And I believe the main energy source was through propane. Obviously we're using water, but then we did a sensitivity analysis because the question was, well, if we're going to go build this type of facility, what's the best place to go and build it? And obviously there's a bunch of different considerations, land costs, labor access, whatever it is. But we looked at doing something in Alberta, and the costs actually reduced quite a bit. The taxes are quite a bit lower. There's quite a few incentives to go and build out there. But when we looked at our environmental impact, it was actually, we were increasing it by about 35%. And that was just because of the use of fossil fuels. But interestingly, when we came to British Columbia, because most, if not all, the electricity is hydroelectric, our environmental impact dropped 35% from baseline. And so what we're kind of finding is that it's not so much just like what, like the amount of energy, but what are the energy sources? Like where are you actually getting this energy from? And this might be a consideration whether, if you're building indoor agriculture systems, the type of energy you use is probably more important than the amount of energy that you need to use. So actually, I thought that was quite an interesting finding because we were assuming coming to BC would be, crazy expensive, and there's not going to be. I mean, there's benefits here for sure, but just the fact that it was going to reduce, like comparing to then Alberta to BC, it's about a 70% reduction, right, in terms of these types of facilities. So.
I'm lucky that I get out to get out to these kinds of events. I was in Guelph one, I guess it was a week or so ago, and the question that always runs through my mind, and is all these ideas we've heard for the last couple of days are great and they're wonderful, and we certainly need to encourage and try to foster those ideas. But I tend to be a bit of a realist, and knowing that 90% of the fresh fruits and vegetables that we consume here in Canada come through the hands of our members. We've got members, everybody from small farmers all the way up to the big multinational retailers. If we sit in lovely downtown Vancouver and you're looking at a condo with 10,000 people in it, how do you feed 10,000 people who, probably don't have access to a city farm or city plots where most of the space in the building is taken up by people and equipment to keep that building running? So that's the one thing that's the way I look at it. And I'm just wondering from the thoughts from the panel here is, how do you actually feed that building of 10,000 people?
If I may. It's a good question. And I think that this is a incremental process. I think that we have to look at urban agriculture a little more seriously than maybe mainstream has in the past number of years, and it's going to be for a variety of reasons. One of the things that I've noted is in the community that I live in, we have probably the largest Amazon distribution center in Canada, and it's built on some of the best farmland in British Columbia and in Canada. And so I look at that every day, and I see that happening. Whether we like it or not, the ALC has tried to protect farmland, but the fact remains every year we're losing our farmland. So at a point you have to say, well, we're going to have to start looking at this differently, because if we're going to keep covering farmland, what are we going to do about it? So going back to the Amazon warehouse, and I was just talking to my colleague here, that there are acres and acres and acres of flat rooftop that's probably ideal for growing produce. And because one of the big issues in agriculture we have, if you think back to when I talked about labor, is trying to get labor into an agricultural area. You got to bus them, you got to do something. There's no bus stops in farmland. So these areas may provide in the future, especially for greenhouses, may be the ideal area, because there's waste heat, there's wastewater that's being cleaned, and there's bus stops, which means labor availability. So I get, how are we going to incorporate it? We have to try to incorporate it in that manner, if that works.
Can I build on this very quickly? Absolutely, I 100% agree. There are opportunities in our cities, and that's the whole concept of building ecosystems in our cities. And we cannot make the same mistake again. We have to focus on a decentralized approach from the city to the neighborhood to the tower that has the 10,000 occupants to the flat to that roof and so on. We have to have literacy across the city where people are aware of how to feed. And we also have to diversify how we grow. It's not just the soil-based, it's not just the controlled environment, it's everything in between. And technology is catching up, grow recipes are becoming better and better, but also to add to the point of the Amazon warehouse, more and more we'll start seeing data centers, heavy data centers because of AI, and has a lot of waste heat. And that coupling of the softscape and the hardscape of the city is essential if we will benefit from the amounts of data centers that are about to grow everywhere in our cities. And we have to engage in that space as well, because it's critical for the future of Canada.
I have a little bit of a different perspective. I think we have to start off, what does it mean to grow locally, right? Local doesn't necessarily need to be inside the cities. Local can be as close as possible to the consumer, where it's economically viable, but also fresh enough. So if you look at the berries coming from Peru and the berries being produced in the Fraser Valley is local, right? And even though I think there is a opportunity to synergize with urban farming, but I think it's quite limiting. It's limited to certain crops. It's limited to the way that you do certain things. I mean, I would envision growing blackberries and raspberries on top of skyscrapers. I don't think that's going to be economically viable, right? But I would envision to have greenhouses that's close enough and as local enough that can meet the requirements of being fresh, of being nutrition, as being available as well. So that's why I see the difference. To answer your question, how can you feed 10,000 people? I think as close as possible to the consumer.
Can I add to this? Because I don't think we disagree. I think we agree. I think we must, first of all, we're not going to satisfy the needs of the city. Oh, we're not going to satisfy the needs of the city with one type of farming. It's going to be all the above, and we have to diversify. And the proximity from the outskirts of the city all the way to that tower, we have to invest in all of them. I think the value in all of them are present and clear, and it's different strategies that we must undertake in the next few years to identify which is the most optimum. Different crops will thrive in different types, whether it's the greenhouse, the large greenhouse outside the city, or the leafy greens that are built in the home of that unit in the tower. So I think we agree.
I think in the interest of time, we can move to the next question or open that, but I can see that circularity or circular economy is also part of that, using waste or other streams from other sectors used for agriculture production, for example.
My question is just related to how we talk about innovation and mechanization as inevitably leading to job losses, and kind of like imagining the elimination of agricultural labor entirely. And I think that's very distinct to the agricultural sector. I don't think other sectors could get away with that. And this has been an ongoing conversation since the 60s with the tomato harvester in California, and we know how that went. And so we've never actually been successfully able to eliminate agricultural labor, and I don't know if that's really what we should be doing. And so I was wondering if any of you could kind of reimagine this innovation and automation and mechanization as a way to improve agricultural labor instead of outright eliminating it. Because inevitably we still do want people working with this sector, because yes, it's 50% of the input costs, but we have to humanize that. And so I just wanted to give that to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we're at the root of the labor issue is the fact that we don't have local labor. We import the labor every year, and farmers are consistently being more and more worried that there's a movement to stop that. And I have to make a little plug here for the offshore labor. They have been. They continue to be tremendous workers. They are professional agriculture workers. They're experienced in it, and we have nothing but high regard. But unfortunately, if governments decide that they don't want to do that anymore, we have to replace them with something, so we're replacing them with innovation. However, here's the caveat, is that when we bring in a robot, just as the mushroom industry is doing right now, guess what you also need, is you need technicians. Now you don't need grunts, you need engineers. You need people that can service that equipment so that the pay levels jump enormously. Maybe there aren't as many people involved, but they're certainly at a higher level, and they can earn a really good living in agriculture.
Yeah, I think I'll echo that as well. As we work with the sector, we do see that the need for high-paying jobs, and these data sciences is another example. A lot of farms and the greenhouses need data science. They're hiring data scientists who would normally typically would not be working at these locations, and they are high-paid jobs. So in many cases, yeah, they are being replaced with the HQPs or highly qualified personnel as well. And again, talking to about technology and its convergence, Mike, you mentioned that AI robotics like 4Edge and NewPick are developing those robotic arms or for picking berries or mushrooms. But then there are also these technologies are not really let's say controversial, and then in some way genomics can be used for gene editing, that's where you start to have this perception built from technology as well. And then you have biological engineering or synthetic biology-based approaches to, let's say, produce cultivated meats, which can be completely a new, form of food you are talking about. So how do, maybe I'll start with you, Mike, but then Sean and Mike, Mohamed, you can also chime in, and Rodrigo as well. How do you see, which kind of technology would have the most impact, in the, let's say, next 5 years or so? Or transformative, if you may call it.
I look at everything through the lens of primary agriculture, and what's going to be the most transformative is things like AI, driving precision ag, so that it's specialized, it's targeted, it's reducing input costs. And the other thing is that when we're talking about plants, we need drought-resistant plants. Climate change is going to change the way we look at everything in agriculture. The demand for water and the reduction of the use of water. We need water storage so that we aren't drawing down water reserves at a time when we have competing interests for that water. So one of the things that Bioenterprise has tried to do is to sort of join groups across the country as advisors. When we have a company that we're working with, if they are looking for a fermentation specialist, we look to places like PEI, and you have to look right across the spectrum, and that is sort of the role is to say, and one of the things that I think we have to do is to identify the facilities that deliver on particular items, and no matter where they are in the country, we can't continue to deliver as if we were 11 different countries. This has to be a national program. We all have to be part of a national ecosystem, and so that if BCCAI does it better than anyone else, they're the go-to guy right across the country, and the same as CFIN. So anyways, we have to kind of take getting into an approach, a national approach, and that will, by doing that, we can sort of solve the major problems, identify the major problems, and try and solve them.
Thanks, Mike. Sean, your perspective?
Maybe just before I continue, I just want to ask a quick survey question, just because we're talking about labor, we're talking about just agriculture, but anyone here who's been on a industrial agricultural farm in Alberta or Saskatchewan and has experienced, the seeding and the harvesting of these broadacre crops? Okay, 6 people. Okay. Yeah, just okay. Yeah. No, because I think this is again kind of one of these conversational points. When we talk about agriculture, when we talk about these food systems and where we want to see these innovations, kind of going back to that initial question, I don't really see a small toaster-sized appliance sitting on someone's kitchen that's going to provide them with sufficient calories for their family or even themselves. It requires massive amounts of land to provide the grains for our pastas and our breads, and these are not things that you have a few people walking through the field harvesting. These are massive pieces of equipment. I'm not trying to lecture or condescend, but just it's more of just me expressing my awe at these systems, coming from the prairies myself, being this was my my playground was a combine in a lot of ways, and so it's just interesting to kind of get this perspective of what happens at the field past the farm gate, through the manufacturing, and then finally, on the shelves of our stores. Like, this is a journey of, many miles and many hours of labor. So again, when I kind of look at where do I see this innovation coming from, or where I want it to go, in a lot of ways it's very selfish for myself and like for my family members. It's systems that work at the smallest scale on the farm, like you said, more precision agriculture. But if you've never been in a modern day seeder, you don't have to steer it. You just sit in there and it goes down, and it's all GPS tracked, and you can seed between like this far of a distance between your crop rows, and every single crop will have the exact same pattern. When you spray the crops, like you follow a seeding plan or a spray plan that gives you the exact amount of like fertilizer and spray that hits the crops. And then again, when you're combining, it's all automated, GPS tracked. I mean, that's just like one farmer in one field, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of these farmers and farms throughout Canada. So I'm kind of just rambling a little bit, but again, it's where I see these innovations are looking at not so much a specific technology, but more of revamping of the system in itself, where when that farmer does put all that like energy and labor into harvesting, it's not just thrown away, right? Like, we go through all these processes of fractionation where we split apart the peas to get a pea protein, and a lot of times the rest of it's just kind of thrown on the ground and left. But the pea starch is like 60% of the material. And so again, like every step you go, there's just these inefficiencies that build up and build up and build up. So when the consumer finally gets that last noodle in that packaged good, it's like, well, you've gone through so much just to get there. And so I think it's, whether it's localizing where the production comes, but also I think just how we understand the system as a whole. And in some ways, I don't even think the innovation is a technology, but it's again just applying this education and this understanding to the general public, to people to understand that it's like when you are biting into that loaf of bread, like it's not just something that you went to the grocery store and grabbed, like that was the last mile, but the hundreds of miles before that I think needs to be understood. Sorry, I'm kind of on my pulpit here, but no, it's just, again, it's something I'm clearly passionate about. But again, I think this is where I'm seeing the innovation going, is it's just more people understanding the path of food before it gets to your plate. And maybe it's not even innovation, but just appreciation of that journey. Because again, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of applied innovations that have occurred from the very seed that is planted, whether this is GMO or drought-resistant crops, all the way again to that package when you have it, so the food doesn't spoil. I'll cede my time.
I think those are great points, and I kind of want to maybe riff off of what you've just said, that and something also that Rodrigo said earlier is that innovation isn't just the new technology, the new products that are being developed, but thinking about kind of new business models, or even new ways to work together to form partnerships or to collaborate. Curious with that in mind, what kinds of new partnerships or new business models between, say, public institutions or startups or industries, what type of innovation is needed there in order to drive, scale up development and some adoption of technology? And that can go out to anyone. Maybe Rodrigo, you first.
If you look at Canada, I think we are top 10 in innovation for agriculture. Oh, yeah, of course, sorry. If you look at Canada, we are about top 10 of agriculture innovation, but I think we fall top 30 or top 40 on commercialization and adoption of those technologies, right? We are behind countries like Slovenia, Italy, Peru, and Chile. And I think one of the main reasons is what Mike mentioned about this fragmented system that we have. We are fragmented across the country, where we act like 11, 13 different countries. There's a lot of stuff happening in Quebec that we don't know about, or in Ontario that we don't know about, which can be applied to what we do here. I think it's a problem of the structure of the country, the structure, the way that we are dealing with bringing innovation from ideation to commercialization, where I do believe that needs to be improved. So for a entrepreneur, it's already a uphill battle to go from ideation to commercialization, and then now you have to face that limitation of, let's say, your innovation applies to Canada, does not apply to BC. But when you go after grants, as an example, some of the BC-based grants demands that it's going to be a BC-based project where you need to generate jobs for BC, where it's really more a long-term strategy for Canada as a country. I give an example with Beritech as an example. When we put together our proof of concept plan, we knew that we had to bring expertise from out of Canada, especially with, I don't know, you're familiar with blueberries. Blueberries, you have the northern high bush, which are the varieties that we grow here, but you have the southern high bush, which are not grown here in Canada. They grow more in warmer countries. So we needed to bring the expertise from Peru, Mexico, and Chile. And the grants would not allow me to pay for that expertise because I was not generating jobs on that project for British Columbia. So that's a impediment that I think it doesn't help us to go into ideation to commercialization. The second element is based on Sean's survey of how many people have been in a farm before, in a big farm, probably less than 5%. I think for the innovators here, it's important that you leave the lab and you go to the farm. And whatever you're innovating on the Agritech side, make sure that it's resolving a problem to the farmer. So I think engaging the farming community on day one is quite important. I have seen many pet projects, with all due respect, where it's a fancy technology, it's really cool, but it doesn't really resolve a problem that the farmer is looking for. So even within Bioenterprise, Mike and I, we advise entrepreneurs, and sometimes the first question that I ask the entrepreneur of the innovation is, what problem are you solving? And then I ask, is it really a problem? And sometimes I don't like the answer, and I say, I don't think there's a business case here to move forward, because you're going to have an uphill battle to actually put this into commercialization, because we're not resolving a major business problem. So I think there are the structure side that I mentioned regarding Canada, but also the mindset of innovation. And it's not just academia, it's academia and young techie entrepreneurs. I have seen, especially over the last 2 years with AI, I have an AI solution for this, I have an AI solution for that, and well, is that really a solution? Have you been to a farm, and do you know how it works? Is the farmer going to accept that solution? So I think all of that is important to understand.
One of the things that's also important to understand is that less than 2% of Canadians are directly involved in agriculture. And what does that mean? Well, it means just what Rodrigo referenced, is you get an awful lot of potential solutions to problems that don't exist. And that's one, because there's no, we talked to the earlier speaker today, talked about your ancestry and what follows on and well, if your ancestry has never been involved in agriculture, it's hard to really understand what's needed for that space.
I'll just remind that we have till 12:10, I believe, for our session. So we'll continue. Maybe we can take at least 2 more questions, Lavina. I can follow up with the Valley of Death, and then maybe you can take IP that we would like to cover. So, so I think, and just so that everybody is on board, what we call Valley of Death for a startup or early stage company is when they are overcoming the critical gap between R&D and successful market adoption. So you have your prototype ready, but you have to then commercialize to get revenue raised. And I think we have a diverse experience in that case on this table here on this panel. And Mohamed, I think you probably would not have faced that. I would, in fact, start with your perspective on how do you see working for a corporate organization, but going through projects that may not be economically viable, and then maybe go on to others to hear their perspective too.
Well, yes, we don't necessarily face the commercialization standpoint because we're not necessarily a startup and we're not necessarily in the agriculture field. We're running a global business in the architecture and construction. But we do have, let's say, miniaturized versions of internal, in our sector, developing certain tools, processes, methodologies, products internally that will make our lives easier. For example, we have identified that resource circularity, biomaterials, the intersection between architecture and agriculture is of significance. And this is why I know that we need partners to make that leap. So we connect to universities, we connect to organizations such as BCCAI, we connect with urban farmers. So bringing that intersection of university expertise, other industry partners, academia, and the city, which in extension talks to policy, that is where we're coming from, because we have enough capacity to fund these initial seed opportunities to develop these methodologies, and then the application, we de-risk ourselves by bringing in all the different partners and all the different stakeholders to basically de-risk ourselves.
So thanks for that perspective. And Rodrigo, like, you have been a serial entrepreneur, if I may say so, and you must have faced this challenge as well. And how do you see that? And how do you also see what, like Mohamed described, because they have the capital, like, but they can partner with organizations like yours as well, for example, to further innovate with and de-risk like yourself and also de-risk themselves too.
Right. So the first thing is for the young entrepreneurs out there, being an entrepreneur is not easy. You need to wear several hats. So one thing is for you to innovate and find a solution. The other thing is for you to bring that solution to market. So you have to be expert in marketing, in commercialization, in finance, in HR. It's a little bit of everything. And the valley of death that Rahul just mentioned, it's that critical stage that all the startups, they go through from creation of the startup until you can actually, seed phase, until you can actually have sustainable revenues and or additional funds that you can move on. It's quite challenging where you need at the same time measure cash flow quite intensively. So, for example, at Beritech, we are very fortunate that our model is a mix of private funds, government grants, but we also have donations from the Western Family Foundation. The Western Family Foundation, they are the owners of Loblaws and Canada Superstore, so they have donated $33 million just for berries, just for finding solutions to grow berries off-season. So we're very fortunate, and a very coincidence, by the way, to actually have that support. But even with that, which we have raised, we have secured up to $7 million for the next 3 years. But even with that, one of the challenges that we have, and that's a challenge for agriculture overall, is that agriculture requires a huge R&D infrastructure, requires a lot of capital investment, and a lot of those programs that we see, especially grants, there is a limit for equipment. So you need to be really creative. How do you do that? How do you bring equipment? One way is, like Mohamed mentions, through strategic partnerships. So today in our project, we have about 12 different companies, all the way from plant breeders to technology providers that wants to test the technology with us, to private investors, to retailers as well, greenhouse producers. Number one, because we're looking for the multidisciplinary approach, and number two as well, to support us within the financial side by bringing in-kind contribution, which is really important when you go through this valley of death. So a main would say, recommendation that I give is make sure that before you start this journey, you have a strong strategic planning, that you have a team that complement one another, right? If you are the technical guy, make sure you have the commercial and business guy beside you and vice versa. Don't go alone. You're going to need that multidisciplinary approach for you together.
Great. Well, maybe one last topic before we wrap up. One of the things that CFIN often looks for when we're evaluating projects for our grants is whether or not there's an IP strategy or if any IP is going to be generated. I think we still see that a lot of founders still struggle with navigating IP strategy, or they see it as something of a later stage concern. Perhaps, Sean, you could tell us kind of what have you learned through Maia Farms and some of your discoveries around your technology. How did you navigate IP, and what have you learned?
Again, I think there's that initial kind of idea that some entrepreneurs have, especially if you're, scientist background like myself, where it's like, well, that will come. Like a patent is a big thing, and we'll get there when we have enough data. But really, it's like what we've started to realize. It's like, no, the first idea you have, the first drawing, the first writing of anything is intellectual property. Intellectual property is not just a patent or a design. It is all the copyright, is all the trade secrets. It's all the know-how that you're developing as you are developing your idea and your invention. And I think we've always had a pretty good head on our shoulders regarding IP. Like that was really where we started out, as was very IP heavy and IP forward. It does get a little tricky because it obviously is quite expensive. To do a patent, I think it's about $30,000 from kind of initial invention disclosure to final submission, and it does take months, if not years, to get the final patent submitted. And so there's a lot of times where you're thinking about ideas and writing things down, and then finally, it kind of culminates into something that could be, not immediately valuable. I guess let's say that. So I think with IP, a lot of ways, it's just understanding that the initial value might actually just be a negative in terms of the cash flow that you are now spending and not having to spend on your wages or your equipment or whatever it is. But what we found consistently is that, whether or not you're working with like a government agency, like the government of Canada wants to keep IP in Canada. So if you work with a funding body, like they want to keep that there so it provides value to Canada. If you're working with investors, they want to see that you have an intelligence to you that allows you to protect the idea if it does ultimately become something valuable. And I also think it's an interesting way to kind of understand like what is an invention finally, and what does it mean to own something that is a non-tangible product. And I think a lot of again, young entrepreneurs, they get in, they go, yes, this is my prototype, this is my idea, let me share it with the world. And then someone goes, neat, that's mine, and they just take it because it's like you just didn't have that. Maybe it was a bit of naivety, maybe it just didn't have the foresight. But if you are, a young entrepreneur who's getting into tech and innovation, like intellectual property should be almost first and foremost what you're thinking about. I always kind of joke, it's the immune system of your company. It is the thing that defends you from invading agents who want to, again, come take your idea and commercialize it in a way that might not be ideal. And like I'm almost two minds of this because, again, coming from academia, it was, here's my idea, I just want to share it. Like, let's just collaborate. But then when you get into industry, it's like, well, now I have to protect this entity. And so that it kind of almost limits your ability to share and make these collaborations and connections. But in a lot of ways, it's also like, learning this from some of the Indigenous communities I've worked with, it's kind of the stewardship of the technology where, hey, like this is my idea, this is the thing that I've been working on and I want to bring into commercialization, but I wanted to do it to my standards. I want it to be safe and effective and provide value to Canada and everyone else who lives here. But I don't want someone to just take this idea and run with it and now it's, polluted in some way or it's used for nefarious purposes. So in a lot of ways, it's not even about trying to get the value, but it is just to protect the thing that, we've been working on and trying to develop.
Yeah, if I could add, as an entrepreneur and an angel investor, I think IP is probably the most valuable, I would say, product that a technology startup may have. But like Sean mentioned, it takes time and costs a lot of money sometimes. It can be even more than $30,000, $100,000, $150,000 for a patent across different countries. It can take 2 or 3 years. And you don't have that money, you don't have that resource, you don't have that time. So what you do, the first thing I think as a suggestion is there are grants for IP out there. IRAP is one of them. I try to see if you can get some of those grants as well. And there are some ways that you don't need to start the patent, but you can start the process. At least you lock it down until you have some more cash and no one can actually touch depending on which country it is. but make sure that you do have an IP strategy from day one. The strategy is not just about the product development, but also how you're going to protect that. And talking about the different IPs, there are patents, trademark, trade secrets. For me, is the one which is very hard for you to protect, because once it's shared, it's not a secret anymore, so it's not protected anymore. So you got to be really, it's a touchy one. And for example, at Beritech, one of the key IPs that we have are our trade secrets, our growth formulas, our horticultural methods, right? And we have been very, very, very strategic and very careful. How do we, at the same time, promote it but protect it?
Yeah, I have a little different approach. I understand the need. I guess where I'm conflicted is I had a conversation with a company, a local company, that's very innovative, and they bring products to market on a regular basis. So I asked him one day, do you patent any of this? And he said, no. He said, I don't have time. And he said, we focus on developing the technology and first to market strategy. That's what their focus is. And as a result, speed is what gets them. One of the issues that we have when you're a young entrepreneur, as we've talked about, is the limited monies that you have, is what happens if you were challenged? Are you going to defend it? Because it costs a pile of money to defend it. So again, I can see circumstances where you probably should have your primary focus, but on other technologies, get it into the market and take your chances.
I think we are.
I'm curious what each of you think about the proposed patent box or commercialization box legislation that is expected to come out in the budget next week. And what that could mean for food innovation. So specifically, the idea is that companies that are commercializing have revenues that could be related to IP that they had developed, whether that's trade secrets, whether that's patents, et cetera, that they're able to be taxed at a lower rate on that, both things that they sell domestically and exported. Any thoughts on what that could mean for food innovation?
Well, anything that taxes less is interesting. And I guess that as a nation, as we've talked about earlier, Hans, we have to move agriculture forward, agriculture innovation in this country. We have all kinds of things going on with our neighbors to the south. And so what we have to do is to develop, if there is any piece that makes it less expensive, like we haven't even talked about, when we're talking about trying to develop a technology in Canada, we didn't even talk about regulatory. And the fact that we used to, as advisors, tell people, okay, if you've got something that demands a regulatory review, well, go to the States, develop it there, and then come back to Canada with it when it's been approved down there. Well, that's a kind of a strange way of doing things. And so I know I've segued away from your original question, but it's all the same thing. We can't do that anymore. CFIA has to be a partner with us as we go through these things, and we can't be sending people to the United States, and we have to do everything we can if it's to lower the cost of bringing a product to market.
Yeah, I think we just do not need innovation on the technology side, but also on the policy side, like regulatory side and process side, and those things are often not looked deeply into. But I think with that, I would like to thank you all for being here for this session. I hope you learned something from the diverse panel we had, how they are passionate about the agriculture sector, despite coming from very diverse backgrounds. And I would also like to thank Lavina for co-moderating this session with me, and also for sponsoring this summit as well. And each of the panel members, thank you very much for being here. And